Alright, hey guys, how you going? In this session, we're going to take a look at the topic of symbiosis and what that actually is, and we're going to look at the different types of relationships that organisms have with one another. Now, symbiosis is defined as when two or more species live together and have some sort of long-term interaction with one another. There are four main types of symbiotic relationships. The first one is called parasitism, when one organisms live off and usually has a negative effect on another organism. Mutualism is when two organisms cooperate together and benefits from each other. Commensalism is when one organism benefits from another organism but doesn't really affect it at all. And Amensalism is when one organism is detrimental to but is unaffected by the other organism. Okay. Now, this this table here shows the type of relationship and the effect on the two organisms. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to understand. So parasitism is really good for organism 1, but it will be considered as harmful to organism 2. Now, mutualism will be really good for organism 1 and also really good for organism 2. Yeah? Commensalism is when it's beneficial to organism 1, but organism 2 is neutral, so it doesn't really have any effect. It's not gaining anything and not losing anything. Amensalism is neutral to organism 1, but it's particularly harmful to organism 2. Now, these are the four types of symbiosis that's there. In terms of relationship, you can sort of say that parasitism in many ways is similar to predation in that it benefits one but is harmful to the other. And you can even argue that competition is a form of relationship where it is harmful to both organisms as well. And so that just gives you a nice little overview between the two. Okay, now we're just going to go through some examples of each one, and we're going to start with parasitism. Now, parasitism is a relationship when one organism, what we call the parasite, lives off and benefits from another organism, which we call the host, resulting in some sort of harmful effect to the host. Okay. Now, parasites can either be living on the inside of the host or the outside of the host, and that's called an ecto or exoparasite or an endoparasite. Okay. Parasites can also be a necrotroph, which means they eventually result in the host dying or killing the host, or a biotroph, which is it harms the host but it doesn't kill the host. Okay, and you can sort of see a lot of organisms which we hear as parasitoids, organisms that live off and eventually kill their host. And so there are certain benefits associated with either one. So for some reason, perhaps maybe the parasite needs to feed off the host and keep it alive for that particular reason, so that there is an ongoing. For other organisms, being a necrotroph means killing the host serves a particular purpose, and we're going to look at a few examples. Some of these examples are a little bit gross, but they are quite fascinating. Okay, so the tick is an ectoparasite that is a biotroph. It lives on the outside of its host and feeds on blood of the host, and it kind of swells up into this engorged state, but it doesn't kill the host. It eventually drops off once it's done, and that's the end of that. Okay. This is a roundworm, and roundworms live inside their hosts, and you really don't want to get one of these guys in you because they can result in all sorts of issues that you have in terms of health. But they live inside, and it's also a biotroph, which means it feeds off the nutrients from the intestines of its host. This little guy here is called the tongue-eating louse, and he lives in the ocean, and he will crawl into the mouth of a fish, release this anesthetic which paralyzes the fish, and so the fish doesn't feel any pain, and the louse will then proceed to eat the fish's tongue, and then kind of situates himself inside the mouth and become the fish's new tongue. So isn't that a gross way to live your life? Not realizing that there is a parasite that has become your tongue. And so the fish will keep eating and then feed the louse inadvertently as it does that. Okay. Oh, by the way, the louse is a endoparasite that is a biotroph. Okay. Now, this is a parasitoid wasp. Now, the parasitoid wasp will actually hunt its prey, but when the wasp needs to mate or release eggs, what it actually does, it will paralyze a caterpillar, and then it will proceed to then inject its eggs into the caterpillar. Now the eggs themselves are the ectoparasite that is a necrotroph. They will hatch into larvae, and the larva will feed off the caterpillar as a nutrient source until it grows up into its own wasp as well. So that is an example of a parasitoid. Okay. The last example is quite gross actually, and this is actually all called cordyceps fungi. This is the host, or was the host. The cordyceps fungi actually spreads by infecting insects along the forest floor. And so the insects, such as the ants, gets infected, and the fungi proceeds to move into the brain or the nervous system of the ants, causing it to go quite erratic. And then the ant, as a result, crawls up a tree where the spore gets released from, sprouts from its head, creating this kind of zombie-like state. And then it releases the fungi to spread into other animals as well. So that is an endoparasite, which is a necrotroph. Okay. Now the second type of relationship is called mutualism. So mutualism is when both organisms benefit, and it has to be from different species. When it is the same species, we call that cooperation. Yeah. And so, when lions work together to hunt down buffalo, that's cooperation. However, when the organisms are from two different species, that's called mutualism. You would have seen this quite often. This is lichen. Now, lichen is a mutual relationship between fungus and bacteria, and they grow together in these kind of like little slimish stuff that grows on top of trees and bark and wood and things like that. Okay. Other examples include root nodules. So a lot of plants will have root nodules, and the nodules actually hold bacteria. There's a little capsule there and there and there, and you can see here that the plants with the root nodules grow better than the plants without, because the root nodules with the bacteria allows them to fix nitrogen from the soil and provide that to the plants for growth. Common examples: bees and flowers. Bees will pollinate flowers, and as a reward they get the nectar, and they turn the nectar into honey. So that's also mutualism as well, where both organisms will benefit. Okay. Now, here are some really awesome examples which you want to spend a bit of time looking at. Mycorrhizal fungi and plant roots. This image here shows a small plant with its roots in yellow, and then you can see here this cloudy white patch that extends beyond the root is the mycorrhizal fungi. Now, the fungi traps nitrogen and phosphorus for the plants. Like the root nodules with the bacteria, the mycorrhizal fungi is extremely good for the plant because it helps the plant gain as much nutrients as it can from the soil. It looks like this kind of stringy stuff that surrounds the roots, and what happens is the plant then supplies the fungus with glucose that it gets from photosynthesis. And so there you can see a really beneficial relationship for both. Okay, coral reefs are another really good example, and for coral reefs actually their mutual relationship is actually called an endosymbiotic relationship with a particular type of protozoan called the zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae are this very small photosynthetic protozoan that lives inside the coral. That's why it's called endosymbiosis. Endo meaning inside, symbiosis means to live with. And so it lives inside of another organism. And so the zooxanthellae live inside the coral, and it can photosynthesize. And so being able to photosynthesize means it can provide its host with glucose and energy, and in return the coral supplies the zooxanthellae with nutrients, and it gives it the best position in the coral reefs to photosynthesize facing the sun. And so the relationship is beneficial to both, and coral reefs are built on this symbiotic relationship. And it, because of this, it actually makes corals the only animal in the world that is able to photosynthesize. Now, isn't that awesome? Okay. The last example is the bullhorn acacia and the pseudomemex ant. The bullhorn acacia is a plant, and it has these thorns, and these thorns actually are hollow, and so it's a form of defense, but more so it actually means that the majority of the plant is hollow, and it is a great place for ants to live. And so the pseudomemex ant lives inside the bullhorn acacia, and the acacia also provides a lot of sap for the ants, and so the ants get this benefit of having a place to live and a nutrient source and in return the pseudomimix ant actually defends the tree from other insects that could possibly feed off the sap and the plants, and it also removes the seeds of other trees. And so this particular relationship is really good for both organisms because they benefit a lot from that. Okay. Commensalism. Commensalism is when one organism benefits from another organism but doesn't affect it in any way. Okay. A good example, a lot of things you'll notice that whenever you see trees in rainforests and things like that, there's a lot of moss that grows on these trees. The term that we actually use for that is called an epiphyte. An epiphyte is when a plant grows off another tree, another plant, but it's quite harmless. Yeah, if it wasn't harmless, it would be a parasite. But an epiphyte is harmless, and so the moss that grows off the bark of a tree are generally quite harmless. Bromeliads tend to grow off other plants, and they too are usually harmless. And so the moss or the bromeliad gets the benefit of being in a nice spot to photosynthesize, but the tree doesn't lose out or doesn't gain anything either. Okay. Another example, you can sort of say rats and humans. Rats have a commensalism relationship with humans in that they scavenge food off us, but they have absolutely no effect on us. Yeah, I mean they're annoying, but some people argue that it's a fairly harmless relationship there. Scientists are often a little bit in debate because the idea that something is completely neutral is a little bit hard to understand because in some way or another, even if it's just a kind of a very minute level, the organism that is benefiting will cause a bit of harm to it. So the moss growing on the plant or on the tree adds a bit of extra weight, and that's a bit annoying. The rats, if it bites a human, can cause it to infect the human, so that's a negative example. And so it's arguable whether there is such a thing as a truly commensalism relationship, but in this particular case, generally the effect is so small that we just ignore it. Okay. The last one is amensalism. So amensalism is when one organism harms but is unaffected by another organism. These are examples that we often don't really think about, but when trees overshadow one another, that's an amensalism relationship. Yeah. So the big trees are really bad for the small trees because they overshadow the trees and block it from photosynthesize. However, the small trees has absolutely no effect on the big tree. Yeah, so there's really not much that the small tree can do. Another example is the black walnut tree. Now, black walnuts don't often grow with other plants because they release a particular toxin into the soil, and it makes the soil quite toxic. So this soil toxicity means that the walnut tree has a negative effect on all the surrounding trees, but the surrounding trees don't have any effect on it. And so it's not benefiting in any sort of way from that. Yeah. So those are the 4 types of symbiotic relationships that we're looking at. So I hope you guys were able to learn a few things there. Okay, see ya.